Thank you so much for making it. I'm very excited about this conversation I'm about to have with Jeff.
Nico.
At the top, I actually want to start with a polling question. You guys have been doing this all day. If you can please take out your devices and go to Bloomberg, STYT.com in your web browser, and then you'll go to live polling, the live polling button there. And the first question that I'd like to ask all of you to just get a temperature of the room is, do you share your location data with any companies? And so the options that you have are, yes, I purposefully share it on all platforms. I share it only on select platforms that I use frequently. I've never really thought about it, plausible, or I don't share it at all. So if you can respond to that, that would be great. And Jeff, if you had to choose one of these options, which would you choose?
I'm very careful, but I have about 50 apps on my phone that I do share location with, but I will parse out ones that I don't feel are trustworthy. So I think trust is a topic when it comes to location that's really important.
Got it. So you seem like an option B. I share
I'm
it
an
only
option
on
B.
select platforms that I use frequently. And it actually looks like that is the winner with about 85% of the vote. Wow. I share it only on select platforms I use frequently. For better or worse, though, I think many people here use a lot of platforms.
It's a very smart, informed audience.
So many people know Foursquare as a check-in application that had been targeted to consumers in the social media age, but the business has really evolved since then, since those early days. And there's a consumer component still that you can use, and maybe on some of your phones, and there's also an enterprise or business-facing component. And Jeff, I want to start by talking about what role you think some of the really large tech companies, Facebook and Google, that offer some location data services had on Foursquare's decision to really progress into more of an enterprise company.
Sure, it's a great question. I actually think of Facebook and particularly Google Maps as competitors, certainly. And you might think, I get this question from investors, how are you going to compete in a world of Google Maps? And it's actually because we're not Google. And it's a tremendous thing. We have about 150,000 companies that use our location tech, and about 75 of the 100 most trafficked brands in America are customers for marketing analytics or mapping technology. And so to give you some examples, if you type the Wayland into Uber, that's Foursquare powering the Uber directory. If you tag a tweet here, that's Foursquare's API powering your ability to detect where the tweet is composed. If you have a Samsung phone, we help tag the photos from this venue. And if you get a Snapchat geofilter, that's Foursquare's technology at work. So we help thousands of apps build geo-contextual things. And you might ask, well, how do you compete with Google? If you think about all those companies I just mentioned, they all work with Google, but they all have reasons to want an independent innovation strategy that isn't dependent on a company that isn't always their friends. We're the Switzerland of location. We're the Twilio of location. And so our job is to be that independent platform to enable big companies, legacy companies, small developers to build geo-aware applications and also consumer insights for marketers. And so that's actually the great thing for us, is because Google is wonderful what they do, but people don't want to depend on them 100%.
Well, what's interesting is that means that many people in this room, whether they realize it or not, may be using Foursquare every single day and definitely leveraging the technology. And you wrote an op-ed piece that was provocative and compelling, and it was calling on the US government to regulate the use of location data by companies. And the headline that you had was, "How to Stop the Abuse of Location Data." I'm not sure if the headline was written by an editor, as mine sometimes are, but where do you see that line of what is abusive to customers? What are the abuses of the location data industry?
So the op-ed, How to Stop the Abuse of Location Data, ran in the New York Times about a week ago, and there are some real reasons why the US and Americans deserve a privacy law. Europe has a privacy law. America deserves a privacy law. And we're very in favor of GDPR. And we don't think it even goes far enough to control the potential abuses of location data. Consumers should be in control. And I'll give you 2 quick examples and then what I think should be the rules. Because there is no rules today about how to use location data and what is informed consent. 2 quick examples. Vice wrote a story that the telcos were sharing the real-time location of a cell phone to bounty hunters. For $300, you could buy the real-time location of a cell phone. That was absurd. That should be illegal. There's a company in California called Vigilant Technologies that has thousands of cameras now reading license plates with AI. They're selling the real-time location of license plates to, again, bounty hunters, to ICE. If you read the New York Times story, there is no opt-in and there is no opt-out. And by the way, it's illegal in 50 states to cover your license plate. So that is a far cry from consumers in control, informed consent, real safeguards. So when I talk about what the law in the United States should be around location data, it's the 3 C's. You should have consumer value, you should have consumer control and consent, and thirdly, you should have consumer protections. And I can talk about what each of those things mean if you want.
Yeah, well, what I'm wondering is, why should people feel differently about Foursquare if they don't explicitly use the apps, but other companies that they do use are leveraging it? What are some of the safeguards that Foursquare puts in place?
Yeah, everything we talk about in the op-ed are things we have put into practice at Foursquare, and so I can give you a bunch of examples, but it's a longer topic. But from the beginning, I think we start with the premise that, and I think Facebook honestly didn't do this. They thought about the good that could come out of connecting the world, but they didn't think from the beginning about, yeah, we can do good, but how could this be abused? And every time we launch new features or new technologies, we have an ethics committee, and we constantly are asking, how can this serve our clients and consumers, but also what could go wrong? And we try to build safeguards in. For instance, we're a 10-year-old company. For almost the entire time, we have built a blacklist of sensitive places. So by default, an LGBT nightlife location, a Planned Parenthood clinic, the denomination on a religious location, those are blacked out in our system. Now we see them because we have to see them to black them out, but that data is not stored in any way, and it's by default off because those could be used for discrimination and all kinds of essential civil rights and life chances. Now, and to take advantage of the power of location tech to know that your teenage daughter is safe, to know where your car is parked, to be able to tell Uber where you want to go and where to pick you up, all these things don't require detailed location trails to be widely available to either the government or the private sector. We don't need that. And so these kinds of safeguards, consumers should not be judged to have consented to anything because of a 200-page terms and conditions. That's not informed consent. You should be able to say in 2 or 3 sentences up front, well, what's the value to you? Is the data going to be shared? And then for more information, click here. But those are the things you need to know before you consent. And value is real. I actually think it should be illegal to ask for the location data of a consumer unless you are providing that a legitimate service that requires that location data. The example I always give is, why should a flashlight app be able to ask you for your 24/7 location? How is that going to help you? I could imagine why it might help them make more money on ads, but what are they doing for you as a consumer? It should just be the law that you can't ask that unless you are providing a real value to the consumer. We have lots of other practices, but I think it is essential that there be safeguards in how the data is used so that it can't lead to discrimination, but we can take advantage of it. And why does the CEO of a location tech company want to argue for regulation? Because we believe so much in the value that we can bring. We can, I think, solve congestion. We can make smarter healthcare interventions in the future. We can make smarter AI. We think the industry needs trust. And so if there isn't a framework that can raise the bar, then it's going to be a race to the bottom. And that's not what consumers and innovation require.
Mm-hmm. So you called for the regulation, but what do you think that regulation should actually look like, particularly because you said you think GDPR maybe doesn't go far enough when it comes to location data in particular?
Yeah, so those 3 C's are kind of at the essence of it. So as I said, I think that there should be rules about requiring to ask for location data, there has to be a value. There should be informed consent, plain words, 2 or 3 sentences, not terms and conditions that are 200-page long is not consent. By connecting my phone to a telco network, which is like breathing air these days in a mobile-first world, I didn't consent to have you sell my real-time location to a bounty hunter, right? I mean, that's not consent. And then these safeguards around, even if you have consented, it should be kind of what we call a Hippocratic oath, you know, the do not harm medical oath. That fiduciary standard that the SEC requires of investment advisors, that should be, if someone has entrusted their location to me, I should have to have a standard to care for that to the interest of that user. And that's a pretty basic standard, and we could have a regulatory body here like Europe does. And it is, people say, well, how would you enforce it? Well, how does any law get enforced? I mean, we have rules and we have fines, and people should be able to report to the government suspected violations. By the way, the number one thing that helps enforce these things is employees at all these tech companies care about how data is used and what their value they're doing. You're seeing this today at Facebook, where employees are organizing a letter against Zuckerberg's decision to allow blatant lies as ads. And you know, the number one thing that might change that terrible decision is employees rallying to say, we don't want to be part of this. And then as a CEO, you have to listen. So that's, I think that a regulatory structure is easily imagined.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really curious what the audience thinks about this point, about government regulation. I know earlier you guys heard from the AG of Ohio, who was speaking about this topic, and it's been very much in the news in the tech industry. So if you can take out your phones again or your other devices, and in your web browser, go to Bloomberg STYT.com and go to live polling. And the second question that I'm wondering is, do you think the US government should regulate the use of consumer location data? And your options are, yes, strict regulation is required in this field. Yes, but it should be moderate and not seek to kill the industry. Only if it's bipartisan legislation, or no. And while they're voting, Jeff, I'm wondering, you know, how concerned are you about the idea of legislative overreach when it comes to regulation? Because, you know, the process starts, but where it ends, you know, no one in industry is in control of.
You know, we really have this internal mantra that data is a privilege, and so it's our job to go to Washington if need be and argue for smart regulation. I think my number one worry with regulation is that the behemoths, the Googles and the Facebooks, once they get into the regulatory and legislative process, it's very easy to craft legislation so that it puts up barriers and protects incumbents. And so what I don't think we want to do is something that's so burdensome that challengers can't exist and only companies with 1,000 lawyers and 1 million bureaucrats could comply, because then you won't have competition, and those who worry about the power of the behemoths, it'll be self-defeating because you'll effectively make these giant companies the only players that can innovate in the space. So that's the number one worry I have, is ensuring competition can continue but with a high ethical bar.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like the first option, yes, there should be regulation, won out, edged out, but there were also many folks, 45% saying yes, strict regulation is required, and 44 saying yes, but it should be moderate and not seek to kill the industry. But that brings me to the question of whether you think there should be some sort of antitrust actions taken against companies like Facebook and Google, and you know, whether you think that companies of that size have impacted the ability of Foursquare to provide its service or may impact its future growth?
You know, I think it's very important that we have privacy rules. I think it's very important that you see specific actions that antitrust law is enforced, so that a big company with a monopoly in one area can't sort of tie competition in other areas. Whether the breakup per se is the right way to do that, I don't know. But either way, breakup or not, I think Facebook is right that we need a privacy set of rules. Breakup won't solve that. This is a much bigger problem. We need a privacy set of rules. The irony is, if there's any company that probably is closer to a trust that's on both sides, it's probably Google more than Facebook. Google is both the biggest publisher technology on one side and it's also the biggest demand side technology, and so they can front run trades through DoubleClick and that network. And so that probably is the closest thing. If that were in the securities industry, it would be front running. That's probably an area where probably there would be an antitrust. There's specific things like the only place it comes up for us is one of our big business lines is we help 18 of the top 20 dining brands in America, and we help about 14 of the top 20 retailers measure whether their ads are working. So we help them understand which half of my ad budget is working and it isn't to drive lift into your stores, to drive real people into your stores. And the only players that won't let us apply that measurement equally really right now are the walled gardens. So we measure 500 publishers, including TV and digital. We measure for about 450 leading American brands. And the only publishers that aren't letting third-party independent measurement judge the effectiveness of their ads right now are Facebook and Google, and I hope that will change. That's an example of proper antitrust enforcement so that there's competition.
Mm-hmm. So since this is the Sooner Than You Think conference, as you look ahead in location data, you mentioned a few areas in which you feel like this industry could really power innovations that touch people's lives every day. Could you expand a bit on what you think the future of location data technology is?
So, I mean, today we help apps be more relevant and personalized, and we help marketers in that way. But as I think down the road, I think about all the industries where location smarts will improve things. And I think about healthcare, for instance, and I think about real estate, and I think about insurance and all of these, and urban planning as examples. I'll give you some examples. Today we're working, we had a Foursquare for Good competition for nonprofits, and the one that won was one called Objective Zero. And as you may know, there's a very high suicide rate among veterans. There's a very high PTSD rate. And so we worked with that team, so these veterans get a peer support network that they can, sort of peer counseling if they're feeling depressed. But one of the things that we wanted to do was use location patterns changing. Like you get up and you go to the gym and you go to work all the time, and suddenly your patterns change in a very anomalous way. Should that trigger a peer counselor to reach out and check in, make sure you're okay? And so that's an example of using analytics and to try to intervene with the nudge at just the right moment for mental health. And you could think of lots of different things. Again, all this is on an opt-in basis, but 80% of the participants who are soldiers who've returned from tour of duty opt in and get this kind of personalized intervention. So that's an example of how location tech can really solve social issues. And urban planning, it's obvious. We're starting to talk to municipalities that want to understand how people use their parks, and is it their citizens or people from different places? How far do people go to a park and all this? And there isn't really an easy way to do that. But we understand how movement happens in a city and can help them plan better park use and utilization. So there's so many applications today. When people pick a site for their next store, they kind of maybe go out for an hour and have a clicker. They hire a kid to sit on the corner. But we understand pretty much in 190 countries, the flow of traffic by time of day and how far people have come from home and work and what other places they like to shop and where they go to lunch. And the analytics power of this to make the physical built environment work better for consumers is powerful. And these are areas we're not even working in. So we announced that we passed some milestones as a 10-year-old company. We're over 100 million in revenue, over 1,000 giant enterprise customers, and we raised 150 million, our biggest round in this year. And so we're gearing up to attack this, but we're mostly in the United States, and the whole world is ahead of us.
Right, and in our last 30 seconds here, I'm wondering what the future of Foursquare itself looks like. Will your company be pursuing a public offering?
I always say that I think the public markets deserve and the world needs an independent location company as a counterbalance and a Switzerland to the giants. So over the next couple of years, we'd like to be a IPO-ready company, but we're a couple of years from that. So for now, I'll just focus on trying to build a great business.
Well, the recent tech IPOs have left some wanting, so perhaps that's for the best. Jeff Glueck, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank all of you.
Thanks.